They left me at the airport like I was trash no one wanted to claim. A 74-year-old man, 3 Purple Hearts, 1 worn-out duffel bag, and $50. My son Dan and his wife Brooke walked away, laughing, 2 bright young faces, shining with the confidence of people who think life is finally theirs to own. They thought I'd sit quietly in some nursing home, confused, sedated, and forgotten. They didn't know who they were dealing with. My name is Samuel Whitaker, Marine widower, survivor of 3 tours in Vietnam. I've buried friends who never made it home, carried men bleeding through jungle mud, and built a life from discipline and silence. What my son stole from me wasn't just a house. It was the last piece of dignity I built with my late wife, Helen. And if there's one thing the Marines taught me, it's that silence is a weapon one the enemy never sees coming. For 3 years, I let them think they were winning. Let them spend my money. Let them laugh behind my back. Let them call me crazy in front of neighbors. All while I wrote down every lie, recorded every whisper, every plan they made to take what wasn't theirs. Because sometimes revenge doesn't come from rage. It comes from patience. And on Memorial Day, in front of 800 people, they learned the difference between a broken old man and a soldier who never stopped fighting. If you're listening, tell me where you're watching from. This is the story of how silence became my battlefield and how a Marine turned betrayal into justice. After Helen died from lung cancer, silence filled the house she once called home. It wasn't peaceful silence. It was the kind that hums in your bones, the kind that makes clocks louder and nights longer. Every room smelled like her perfume for months. Her favorite chair stayed by the window, facing the maple tree we planted on our 5th anniversary. For a long time, I couldn't even walk past it. My son Dan came by one evening with that voice he uses when he wants something. "Dad, you shouldn't be alone. Move in with us for a while, just until you get back on your feet." It sounded reasonable. Grief dulls the edges of judgment, and I was tired of empty rooms. So I said yes. I packed up Helen's pictures, my medals, and the lockbox she gave me for our 40th anniversary, fireproof steel, small enough to hide, heavy enough to matter. The house was mine, bought and paid for in 1987 with my disability settlement from Vietnam. Valued today about $285,000. But I let Dan handle the bills. He was my only child. You want to believe your blood won't draw your blood. The first signs came disguised as concern. Brooke would remind me to take my medication like she was talking to a child. Sertraline 100 milligrams, Prazosin 2. If I missed a dose, she'd announce it to the dinner table like a victory. "Pill time again, Pops." They'd share that look, half pity, half disgust. I pretended not to notice. When a car door slammed outside or the garbage truck backfired, I'd flinch. It's called muscle memory. To me, it was 1969, again the rice fields, the noise, the smell of iron and gunpowder. To Dan, it was entertainment. "There he goes," he'd say, smirking, acting out his war movies. One night, I caught Brooke filming me on her phone. "For your own good," she said, "in case we need to prove you're struggling." I laughed it off. But later that night, I deleted the video from her. iCloud didn't tell her. Old soldiers learn when to let the enemy expose themselves. The humiliation grew subtle before it became sharp. I started eating after they did cold leftovers, paper plates. They said the good china was too fragile. Funny, so was I. I'd apologize constantly for making noise, for forgetting the remote, for existing. "I'm sorry, son. You're not difficult," Dan would say. "You're broken." That line hit harder than shrapnel. They stopped calling it my house. It became our house, then their house. And every time I asked about a missing bill or strange charge, Dan's tone sharpened. "You get confused with numbers, Dad. Let us handle it." Confused. The word that kills dignity faster than age. I wasn't confused. I'd been balancing aircraft budgets for Lockheed Martin before Dan was even born. But I let him believe it. Because Marines don't charge in without reconnaissance. And every day under their roof, I gathered intel quietly, methodically. Every cruel comment went into my phone's recorder. Every bank statement photographed. Every act of disrespect remembered. I didn't know it yet, but I was already fighting a war. Not against bullets, against the people who shared my last name. It started with small lies, the kind you can't defend without sounding guilty. At the grocery store, Dan would speak just loud enough for others to hear. "Dad, you already bought milk yesterday." Remember, I hadn't. But the woman beside us didn't know that. She just gave me that look people save for the lost and the dying. At church, he'd guide me by the elbow. like I was made of glass. Careful, Pop. Watch your step. Every gesture rehearsed, every whisper staged. He wasn't protecting me. He was performing for an audience. Brooke played her part too, the caring daughter-in-law, documenting her charity case. She filmed my tremors, my pauses, my bad nights, all for medical reference. One evening, I overheard her talking on the phone. If we can prove he's declining, the court will have to listen. That word proof stuck in my head. Proof was what I'd start collecting next. My world shrank one lock at a time. First, my mail. We'll manage that for you, Dad. Then my phone calls. He gets confused talking to the VA. By the time I noticed, they'd rerouted my veteran benefits to their joint account. When I asked about it, Brooke smiled. We're taking care of you. Care felt a lot like captivity. The worst was the Tuesday morning humiliation. The garbage truck slammed its tailgate, and I froze, noise vibration flashback. I heard Dan's laugh behind me. There he goes again, PTSD Olympics. He said it loud enough for the neighbors to hear. They chuckled politely, pretending not to. Brooke filmed that too. And in that moment, something in me went cold. Not angry, just done. Soon after, I overheard them planning around the kitchen table, the same table Helen and I had shared for 30 years. Once we get the deed transferred, Brooke whispered, we can refinance. Maybe get that pool. Dan nodded. Dad won't even notice. The meds keep him foggy. They laughed. I didn't. I stood in the hallway, hands shaking, realizing I'd trained my own enemy. He had my discipline, but none of my honor. By winter, the isolation was complete. Dan controlled my mail, Brooke handled my bank, and both of them managed my reputation. They told neighbors I was losing it, told church members I was under supervision, even told my doctor that my memory was fading. When I confronted them, Dan said, Dad, this isn't personal, it's protection. Protection from what? From myself, apparently. They were building a case, a paper trail of pity. Every word, every rumor, every false kindness was another brick in the prison they planned for me. But what they didn't understand is that Marines don't panic under siege. We plan, we wait, and we don't miss. So I smiled, apologized, and played the part of the helpless old man. Every yes from my mouth was a trap they didn't see, because I wasn't surrendering. I was documenting. And the moment they thought I'd broken was the moment I started to win. They thought they'd stripped me of power. They didn't know silence can be an ambush. For months I said nothing. No accusations, no threats, no tears. Just notes carefully written, time-stamped, dated. I started with the basics evidence. Every missing piece of mail, every suspicious withdrawal, every cruel remark, they all went into the logbook Helen had once used for our grocery lists. I wrote under each entry the same phrase for later. Then came the recordings. A small digital voice recorder, voice-activated, 60-hour storage USB port. Bought it at Radio Shack on a quiet Thursday. I hid it in my shirt pocket under the VA appointment slip where no one would look. For weeks, it captured their voices without effort. Brooke rehearsing fake concern, Dan discussing guardianship options. 47 minutes of cruelty, deceit, and greed. Each word a bullet I'd fire when the time was right. But the most important weapon was the lockbox under my bed. Helen had called it my war chest. Inside were the things Dan never thought to look for: the original 1987 deed to the house purchased outright with disability pay. VA medical evaluations from Dr. Lauren Hayes, every report concluding the same: fully functional, mild anxiety, no cognitive decline. And the Lockheed Martin pension statements totaling $1.3 million in accumulated value. Dan thought I lived on $1, $200 a month. He had no idea about the separate account I maintained in downtown Fayetteville. He was stealing pennies while I sat on a fortress. Still, I knew this couldn't just be about revenge. It had to be legal. It had to be public. So I called an old friend, Colonel Richard Lawson, retired VFW commander, lawyer, and Marine brother. We'd served in different wars, but spoke the same language, truth delivered through precision. Rick, I said, I might need your expertise. He didn't ask why. Marines never need the full story to stand by a comrade. Bring everything Thursday morning. We'll review before they make their move. Copy that, I said. Thursday at 0800. 2 days before that meeting, Dan cornered me in the kitchen with a folder. Dad, we need to talk about your future. Brooke stood behind him, phone recording, smile polite. I could smell the trap before he opened his mouth. They spoke in gentle tones like wardens soothing an inmate. Words like structure, care, and competency floated through the air like poison. When he finally said, "We just need your signature," I nodded. "Of course, son. Whatever you think is best." My hand trembled just enough to sell the act. I didn't sign, just touched the pen and said, "Thursday, I'll be ready." That night, I opened the lockbox one last time, checked every document, every recording. Helen's photo sat on top, smiling in her quiet way. "Still watching my 6, I whispered. By dawn, I had made 3 copies of everything, one for Rick, one for the bank, one for me. The original stayed sealed in the box. When you've lived through 3 tours in Vietnam, you learn not to strike first. You let your enemy expose their position. Dan thought he'd set the trap, but he was already standing inside mine. Thursday at 2:00 p.m., their meeting, my counterstrike. They just didn't know I'd already loaded the weapon. Memorial Day dawned clear and bright, the kind of morning that fools you into thinking the world is gentle. At Ori 800, I buttoned my dress blues for the first time in 15 years. 3 Purple Hearts, Bronze Star, Combat Infantry Badge. The medals Helen had once polished by hand. They glimmered in the sunlight like old memories refusing to die. Dan hovered around me like a campaign manager. "Dad, this is huge. The whole town will be there. You're the Grand Marshal." He'd read about it in the Fayetteville Observer. 2 days earlier, my friend Colonel Rick Lawson had arranged that nomination himself. "Just smile," Dan said. "Wave. Try not to get overwhelmed." I smiled the way soldiers do before the mission begins. "I'll do my best, son." The parade rolled through Hay Street, lined with hundreds of faces, veterans' families, children waving flags. Dan and Brooke stood near the reviewing stand, their phones raised, ready to film the devoted son escorting his fragile father. That was their story, their lie, and I was about to burn it down. The car stopped at the microphone. Rick approached his uniform, pressed his expression unreadable. He saluted. "Ladies and gentlemen, our Grand Marshal Marine veteran Samuel Whitaker, 3 Purple Hearts, Bronze Star, 1st Marine Division." Applause rolled across the crowd. Dan beamed. Brooke filmed. I stood. "Thank you," I said into the microphone. The air stilled. "For 3 years, some of you have heard stories about me, that I'm confused, unstable, even violent." Dan's smile froze. Brooke lowered her phone. "They said I couldn't manage my own life, that I was losing my mind." A murmur rippled through the audience. "Today I'd like to clarify something." I reached inside my jacket and pulled out a manila envelope, thick, heavy, labeled with neat handwriting. "Evidence." "This," I said, holding it up, "is my VA medical evaluation. 15 years of records signed by Dr. Lauren Hayes, stating I'm fully functional, no cognitive decline." Gasps. I unfolded another paper. "This is my Lockheed Martin pension statement, $1.3 million. Money my son never told anyone existed because he planned to control it once I was declared incompetent." Dan shouted from the crowd, "Dad, stop, you're confused." I looked at him. "Confused," I said, sliding the final item from the envelope, a small digital recorder. "This device holds 47 minutes of your voice, Dan and Brooks. Planning to steal my house, forge my signature, and put me in a nursing home." The crowd erupted gasps, whispers, camera flashes. Rick stepped forward, calm as ever. "I'm Colonel Richard Lawson, VFW Commander and Attorney of Record. Mr. Whitaker's evidence has been reviewed and filed with the District Court. Effective immediately," he handed Dan a folder. "This temporary restraining order signed this morning by Judge Alvarez prohibits both of you from entering Mr. Whitaker's property or accessing his accounts." Brooks' face drained of color. Dan stood speechless, hands shaking. "This is insane," he muttered. "No, son," I said softly. "This is accountability." Voices rose from the crowd. "Shame, disgraceful. How could you do that to your father?" Rick turned to me. "Sam, do you need transport home?" "Appreciated," I said. Staff Sergeant Marco Rivera, the younger Marine who'd once seen through their lies at that barbecue, stepped out of the crowd and saluted. "Sir, I'll drive." "Thank you, Sergeant," I said. Marines look out for Marines. As we walked past the crowd, I heard someone shout, "Semper Fi, Mr. Whitaker." Another yelled, "You showed them what honor means." I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I just walked, slow, steady medals glinting in the sun, leaving behind the two people who had mistaken patience for weakness. By the time we reached the car, the crowd was still buzzing. Dan stood on the stage papers, trembling in his hands, surrounded by stares that would follow him for years. He'd wanted to prove I was broken. Instead, he proved I was unbreakable. By the time Marco dropped me home that afternoon, the phone was already buzzing. Neighbors had seen the confrontation. Videos were spreading across Fayetteville faster than wildfire in a dry field. 800 witnesses, 800 cameras, 800 reminders that truth once spoken can't be buried again. By sunrise, the parade footage was everywhere. Veteran exposees family fraud live on Memorial Day. The local paper called it the most shocking moment in the town's history. I called it overdue. At Order 600, Dan and Brooke were already packing. I watched from my porch as a moving truck swallowed their furniture piece by piece. They didn't look up, not once. Shame has a way of keeping your eyes on the ground. By noon, sheriff's deputies delivered official copies of the restraining order. Effective immediately, no entry to my property, no access to my finances, no contact except through Colonel Lawson. It was written in black ink, but it felt like breathing for the first time in years. At 1400 hours, Wells Fargo called. "Mr. Whitaker, we've reviewed your documentation. The account your son managed shows unauthorized activity, approximately $47,000 over 3 years. The voice on the phone was calm, clinical. BMW payments, Nordstrom purchases, travel expenses. We've reversed the charges and referred the case to the Financial Crimes Unit." "Thank you," I said simply. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about the principle and the proof that I hadn't imagined any of it. 2 days later, the Fayetteville Observer ran a front-page article, "Local Marine Exposes Family Fraud During Memorial Day Parade." "I always thought something was off about the way that son treated his father," said neighbor Elaine Carter. "Now we know why." "Disgraceful behavior," added veteran Frank Delaney. "Marines don't abandon Marines. Family shouldn't abandon family." The court moved quickly. With Rick's documentation and the recordings, district prosecutors filed charges: elder abuse, financial fraud, and forgery. Dan and Brooke were released on bond, but their world was already caving in. Dan's employer, an insurance company, suspended him pending investigation. By Friday, he was terminated. Company policy: zero tolerance for fraud. The BMW was repossessed 2 days later. Turns out he was 3 months behind on payments even before the parade. Brooke, stripped of her social status, couldn't face the neighbors. She stopped posting on social media, stopped going to church, stopped pretending. They moved into her mother's small apartment across town. 2 rooms, thin walls, no audience. From a $285,000 house to borrowed space. Poetic, really. Meanwhile, Rick called with updates almost daily. "Restitution's moving forward," he said. "You'll recover every dollar plus damages." "Good," I replied. "Any word on sentencing, they'll plead. The evidence is airtight." He was right. By the end of summer, both accepted plea deals: 2 years probation, full repayment, 200 hours of community service at the VA hospital. The irony wasn't lost on me. They'd spend their weekends serving the kind of veterans they once mocked. But the real punishment wasn't legal. It was social. In small towns, disgrace travels faster than gossip. At the grocery store, people whispered as they passed. At church, pews shifted when they walked in. In Fayetteville, forgiveness has a waiting period, and they hadn't earned it yet. One afternoon, Elaine Carter knocked on my door, holding a casserole. "Sam," she said softly, "we're sorry. We should have seen it sooner." "You see what you're allowed to see," I told her. "But thank you." She left the dish on my counter, chicken and rice, the same meal Helen used to make for grieving families. I smiled for the first time in months. By week's end, the house was quiet again. Not lonely, quiet earned quiet. Every room smelled like peace instead of pity. For the first time since Helen's passing, I walked through it and felt like it belonged to me again. 3 weeks after the parade, the house felt different. Not bigger, not cleaner, just honest again. The lies were gone, and so was the noise. I walked from room to room, touching the walls Helen once painted, the table where we shared our last Christmas, the window where she used to hum old Sinatra songs. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a guest in my own life. Colonel Lawson stopped by twice a week. No uniforms, now just coffee mugs and laughter. He'd bring updates from court, talk about new cases, sometimes just sit in silence. With me, the good kind of silence. He told me the Cadell Anderson Elder Advocacy Fund had launched with donations from veterans across the state. 12 cases already in progress, men and women just like me tricked by family but not beaten. I smiled. Helen would have liked that, I said. Rick nodded. She'd be proud. Marco Rivera and his wife came by often too. Their little girl Lily started calling me Grandpa Sam. At first I corrected her. Then I stopped. Some titles you earn through blood, others through kindness. I started sleeping better. Dr. Lauren Hayes adjusted my medication, said my PTSD symptoms had improved. Turns out being gaslit by your own family is worse for your mind than combat. Once that stopped, so did the nightmares. Every morning at 0600, I sat on the porch with black coffee and watched the sun crawl over the maple tree Helen and I planted. The medals hung above the mantel again, framed with her handwriting still on the back. For the man who earned them, I earned them twice, once in war, once in peace. Dan called twice. Both times I told him to speak to Colonel Lawson. He wanted forgiveness. What he needed was consequence. Some debts aren't paid in money, they're paid in reflection. He'll have plenty of time for that. I wasn't bitter anymore, just done. Done apologizing for surviving. Done letting others define what broken looks like. Done mistaking silence for weakness. That afternoon, Lily sent me a text, "Happy birthday, Grandpa Sam. Can we see your medals today? I'd forgotten it was my 75th. Of course, sweetheart, I typed back. Come by after school. As the sun set, the porch filled with laughter, real easy laughter. Rick poured coffee, Marco grilled burgers, Lily chased fireflies. For once, the house was full of people who wanted nothing from me but my stories. I looked at the medals at Helen's chair at the flag folded neatly on the shelf. Freedom doesn't always come from winning wars. Sometimes it comes from walking away from the wrong battlefield. If you're listening, remember this: it's never too late to reclaim your dignity. It's never too late to fight back. And it's never too late to choose peace on your own terms.